It's weird to believe that direct-to-DVD films ended about 17 years ago with The Little Mermaid prequel Ariel's Beginning. Interesting for the fact it ended on a prequel and that they all of a sudden decided to stop that once and for all, where a new era of Disney animation was birthed and their focus with bigger Disney revival era hits where the properties they also bought during the time just made it pointless for them to even continue. That is, until the day they decided to make theatrical sequels once again, starting with films like Ralph Breaks the Internet and Frozen 2, where although they made decent financial success, they still lacked in overall quality and returned the studio back to a direct-to-home video era quality that can only at least be on par with The Rescuers Down Under. That they have had no luck in attempting to make something worthy to really stand out and make an impact for a sequel compared to their sister studio, and that's something that still remains today, with one sequel we've already discussed in a more positive critique of the film, which of course is in fact Moana 2, the movie originally made to be a Disney Plus series that the head honchos decided would be better as a theatrical one, something that would better serve as their comeback strategy after films like Wish failed in the year before. And looking back on it again in this full review, it's still not a film I hate, still enjoying several moments of it, but how it's just so apparent that it was never supposed to be a movie in the first place. That we have now turned the clock about 17 years ago to the last era of the direct-to-DVDs, where it has fully infested the big screen as the first major TV sequel to air in a long time. We say TV sequel here because that's exactly what this series was meant to be, an episodic adventure taking long after the first film, where it is more akin to something like the Stitch film that was the pilot to the Lilo and Stitch series that aired on Disney Channel back in the early and mid 2000s. And these were actually my favorite things growing up actually, despite talking about the negative attention of these sequel films where I just have too many fond memories of this own franchise, waiting of course to how the live action film would end up being. This of course relates to my own background, being born in Hawaii and actually being Hawaiian myself, where I've enjoyed these stories that take place in my island home. Speaking of both heritage and culture across the Pacific and as a part of the Polynesian community. Of course, the series doesn't dive into pre-colonial history and focuses on Hawaii as we know it now in modern day events, but that's something I still relate to. But when something like Moana first came out, we got to see our grand shared mythology come to life in some way. Sure, I know with anything, it's not going to be completely accurate with regards to every culture in the Pacific, but it still doesn't mean I can't have fun with the call of the ocean, the nature of both land and sea, and how vast the Pacific is, only being mostly made up of small, tiny, lush green islands for the most part. It was simply just a great movie that any of us could enjoy, especially for me knowing cultural issues, and actually became the biggest streaming movie of all time on Disney Plus, even bigger than Frozen itself with its impact, topping the same charts every year in and every year out. And although we can talk about the culture here in terms of the gods of the world, that's not really what we are driven here for, even though it's a very interesting history that I would love to share with you, where it's just mostly based on the original work for what they did with Moana, connecting us thousands of years ago, where this film is just trying to take us to the next step. And this video is just simply to detail the full episodic nature of this film, where various stories are meshed into one continuous film that causes you to question if it really was the best idea to make it into a movie, realizing why didn't they go with the series in the first place by the way they ended things off. That if they were actually to make a competent sequel to Moana, they would have made it a film in the first place or reworked it a lot more for the characters having an involvement in the story, because you do get a story from the initial call to the ultimate ending, but seems so rushed, literally divided when your hero is over here and then your sidekicks are over here being sidelined. Also combined with the fact that there is a new crew working on this entire film when it comes to the directors and the songwriters, since everyone else including the composers and all the actors had actually returned except the actual producers. I mean, the screenplay was done once again by Jared Bush, who most of us know now as co-directing Zootopia and Encanto, who recently got promoted to Chief Creative Officer of Walt Disney Animation after Jennifer Lee stepped back to focus on the Frozen sequels, which is a positive because I've enjoyed most of his work and the screenplay, which doesn't actually bother me due to the real fact of where this project was originally made for. But besides that, you had the new crew like new directors like David Derrick Jr., who worked mostly as a story artist, working at DreamWorks beforehand with films like Megamind and then joining Disney with films like Moana and Encanto before arriving here with two other co-directors. Something I can mostly assume was for the different episodic sequences, even though most Disney and other animated films had more than one director. And the most apparent thing that people point out is in fact the new songwriters of this film, consisting of Abigail Barlow and Emily Bear, two musicians I don't really have any familiarity with since I really don't listen to that field, but will say that they aren't really bad. I do get down to their music, but not as much as Lin-Manuel Miranda's original Moana soundtrack, effectively being weaker versions of that entire soundtrack that is truly meant for an animated series rather than a full-on movie. Like, listening to this entire soundtrack back is something that can match the highs of what a Disney direct-to-DVD film would do rather than a full-on movie like most of this has covered. Compared to say something like Frozen 2, which was actually a great soundtrack that had the original songwriters come back and compose it once again, compared to this one, where you put all of these facts together, it just becomes more apparent that Moana 2 is just on the same level of films like Mulan 2 and Hunchback 2, as I had just recently covered. Not on the fact that this film is the same quality as those two, it's far more better than that, but just that it has those same direct-to-DVD quality beats of a lesser story and a lesser soundtrack. Because overall, since I haven't really been a fan of Disney sequels at all, Moana 2 has so far been the more preferable movie to me, where you can't really seem to hate it or love it compared to getting enraged at films like Ralph Breaks the Internet and confusingly frustrated at Frozen 2. I mean, yeah, I do get frustrated at this film, but it doesn't really bother me at the fact that I completely dislike it. In fact, this is a film that is still considered to be on the level of those two films if you compare the dreaded cinema score, the true test of any movie if it would be good or bad for the public to watch. And speaking of cinema score for a second, is where we have to point out that it's a rating system that really isn't a full audience review of a movie, but more of a satisfactory score if people got what they were advertised. An A score means you are satisfied, and a below that means much less. This film, like other sequels, got an A-, which is the usual low score that Disney films can get, except for Strange World, which nobody saw, getting a B score, reflecting its trash box office. Wish also did get an A- and failed, but when it comes to sequels, they still make massive amounts of money, as seen with Frozen 2 of $1.4 billion, and now the likes of Moana 2 with $1.05 billion. Where, to me, if Moana 2 was an actual complete film, and probably gotten like an A cinema score, it could have even beaten Inside Out 2, as I believe as the highest grosser until China alone would be responsible for turning Ne Zha 2 into the highest grossing animated film of all time, or even the top 10 films of all time. Like, that's still hard to imagine how that market alone can completely wipe out everything we know off the face of the earth. But beyond that financial talk that we don't know much about anyways, is just dealing with this weird movie bringing the old direct-to-DVD era back to the big screen. So much so that we're going to compare it to several in the past like we just mentioned, but how this one is going to go near the scope of the cancelled Atlantis series that resulted in a film like Milo's Return. Because let's go back into production of what we know, shall we? Something I've been personally anticipating since the release of Disney Plus back in 2019, where Jennifer Lee was creative officer and announced that the musical Moana series would be released on Disney Plus in 2023, alongside other announcements like a Tiana series for Princess and the Frog. The small series was meant to consist of only 5 episodes that would focus beyond the events of the original movie, being helmed by mostly the same people except for what we talked about in directors and writers, and also entered in development during the same time as their live action film, where the crew of that very film actually came on to help to finish write this one, which one of them was in fact the co-directors of this film. I mean, it's not hard to imagine why they would bring them on soon enough, considering the fact that they're working on a remake and that doesn't take too much effort other than to add the minuscule scenes that add no importance to the story, but you know, they just did it for whatever they wanted to do. But overall, they decided to delay the series from its release after they received positive notes on how production and the story was going, the point of where executives were questioning why shouldn't they release this to the big screen with how great things were going in terms of music, story, and its animation. Where if you don't know, most of Disney Plus Walt Disney Animation produced shorts and series are actually done in their Vancouver division studio that opened up a few years back, meaning that this would be the first movie produced as a film by that division compared to Burbank. That led to events in January being told by the studio's chairman that they would need to switch from its episodic nature to a full feature, as next month, CEO Bob Iger would deliver the news that Moana 2 would be the next film to come out. A news that would be so unprecedented at the time because how we would be used to the later stages of the previous year announce or actually air a big teaser of a film compared to just 10 months before its official release, where it was possible to do this because of the full animation we seen wasn't done until the actual year it would come out compared to beforehand when development was just in the years prior, so it can be easily switched out as their next film, but how that is also a sign of confusion to what exactly they were planning for this year before Moana 2 after the performance of films like Wish doing so poorly at the box office, on top of Strange World of course doing even worse, where even though it seems great to make it a movie, having all these parts there to line up, the development that was 95% focused on making a miniseries in the first place rather than a movie, just did seem somewhat desperate. A move that is just done to soften the blow of failures that they didn't even expect to have gotten. So just because you think that the footage deserves to be a theatrical release, doesn't mean it would feel like one or be reviewed like one, since you see the elements meant for something else that is there. Because there's just simply a clear difference between making a movie and making a series. They have two different intents on how a story begins and ends with a bigger arc to it. And then of course you have your ending, as we will suggest more content on the way depending on how it's received, which the original movie did not do in any shape or form. So this is where we first talk about Atlantis Milo's Return and how such a film receives similar treatment in one way but also very different in others. The familiar part to connect to Moana 2 is how it was planned to be a series called Team Atlantis, rumored to have up to 24 episodes probably released on Disney Channel but was never made due to its own box office disappointment, and even beforehand how it was just going to be a straight sequel before they made it into a series in the mind that changed things, where the film actually just consists of 3 major segments to that series that were just episodes, and it's just very obvious from beginning to end. Just one journey after the next that connects to the grand finale of Atlantis finally coming back to the surface. Like there are clear cuts in the movie between segments that shows what its intent was being packaged into a direct-to-DVD film, and also a guiding template of comparison to how the 5 mini episodes of Moana were going to be seen. Of course you won't find the cuts so easily as they did intend to make a full-on film finally, but you will notice circumstances and events that showed where it clearly lied. So after all this brief talk about the production, let's actually dive into the story of Moana 2. So 3 years after the events of the original, Moana has been traveling from island to island just like her ancestors and has been searching for clues to other people out there in this vast ocean, finally trying to connect everyone once more as they did before finally going back to voyaging. And as the intro of this film, it's actually pretty decent to begin with since we got to know the adventure, feeling easy enough that it could translate into a film, yet how I could still feel it's also meant to be a series by how fast things begin with Moana back into the picture. Because going back to the original film, we begin with Grandma Tala's tale of Te Fiti and Maui, and here we're just quickly starting off with Moana herself on these small islands looking for evidence of people who lived or travel on these islands. Like there has to be some clue here somewhere where the chicken Hey Hey, played once again by Alan Tudyk, successfully finds it.
You sweet, beautiful chicken!
This piece of pottery points to a hidden island where a bunch of people traveled to where she happily takes them back home with her first song of the film. This song titled We're Back mirrors that of Where You Are from the original Moana, discussing staying on their island and now being turned into a song contrasting with exploring all the others away from it. Your first taste to how this soundtrack tries its best to match the highs of the original, but also not quite as good since it does just that. As predominantly discussed, Lin-Manuel Miranda just did not return to this film due to other commitments at the time. Mostly it was the fact that Disney themselves actually didn't ask him to return, knowing that this was meant to be a series and that he really wanted to work on other films like Mufasa after finishing work on Encanto and other films he produced during that time, causing full attention on a project with a movie he loved. So they just went with Abigail and Emily, who instead did a good job for what kind of project it was, working with the original composers of the film like Mark Mancina and Opataya, who provided the great sounds of the movie and the Pacific instruments. And working with the Oceanic Cultural Trust, they still provided a strong beat for the most part, except of how the overall song structure just doesn't actually feel like it delivers an impactful message for its course of events, if you get what I'm trying to say, where they're mainly locked to a specific subplot which was just one episode rather than the other. Like there isn't a constant flow of the original soundtrack since it's not meant to be a film. And there's just more than enough songs to fit in each original 5 episodes, going from one portion to the next that makes sense within those contexts of each individual story, but not the broader movie. But there are more positives about this too, and why I don't really dislike this film as much as others, including Moana's father being played once again by Tamora Morrison, who does actually sing in this film. I mentioned this fact before and praised this because I've heard him sing before, and you can actually find his covers on YouTube with his debut album back in 2014. And the reason to talk about this fact is because back in the original 2016 film, he did not provide his singing voice in Where You Are, and that was instead delegated to Christopher Jackson, which made me upset ever since I saw him at Star Wars Celebration in 2022 with his cover of Drift Away.
waters and free my soul. Wanna get lost in your rock and roll and drift away.
And then hearing it where I know that this guy could actually sing. The beloved Boba Fett of Star Wars and every other clone trooper just has this great voice, and now finally has gotten his chance to shine in this song alongside Auli'i and the rest of the cast. The song is meant to introduce us to our new characters like Moni, Loto, and Kele. Moni being a super fan of Maui, talking about meeting him or so he wishes, Loto being a quirky craftswoman who likes to build or upgrade boats that Moana travels on, and then finally, Kele is a grumpy old farmer who absolutely hates singing or traveling, played by David Fane. Where this song just dives into these new characters because it's clear that they're going to join us on our new journey as Moana greets her own family back like her younger sister, Simea. And I think the greatest part of Moana 2 is obviously their relationship. They both love each other so dearly and seek to be like one another, that her goal now as a young adult is to ensure that her life and the life of her people are well off, just like she set out to do in the first, journeying for the good of the island and their ancestral past as wayfinders before things might have died off. She fits perfectly for the role she was intended, like the rest of her family, except for the new characters I just mentioned. And this is where Atlantis is going to play a greater role in comparison when you have this ensemble crew together that joined Milo in both films, and now how that concept has just been introduced in Moana 2. Remembering that the original journey was just focused on Moana and Maui and their relationship, but how they include more people now that end up nowhere to go. But now for her sister, she explains why she's been out there searching from island to island and the purpose as a wayfinder. Where events prior to Maui's heist of Te Fiti's heart, their own ancestor, Taiai Vasa, that appeared in the visions when they did wayfind, was seeking a way to connect all the people of the Pacific, exploring the ocean to greater heights and whatever is possible beyond that beloved horizon. I'm sorry, my mind was on pirates for a second there. Let's get back to the story.
Before Maui stole Te Fiti's heart and we stopped voyaging, Taiai Vasa wanted to connect our island to all the people. And now that I'm a wayfinder, it's my job to continue what he started.
So ever since Moana reconnected their people to wayfind once again, she made it her mission to find out what he started a long time ago, and sets us for the journey that is about to begin. And this finally catches us up with Maui again, who seeks the same thing that Moana has to search for, as she will find out soon enough, with an island hidden somewhere in the Pacific guarded by the god Nalo, who controls storms and is also noted as the main villain of this very film. One who does continue the tradition that we started back when Te Fiti was the villainous Te Kā in that form, where Moana does have this interesting aspect where they don't go with the conventional villains and instead go with circumstances beyond their control in terms of, their actual gods. In this sequence, he gets stopped by Matangi, who acts as his enforcer and controls bats, stopping Maui from ever helping or settling with Nalo or helping Moana, who is also in danger if she goes too far. And when I watched this scene for the first time in the theater, I could already tell that this was clearly a chopped up episode. I mean, I knew it already, but this sequence happening this early on after connecting with Moana just feels like something that comes straight out of an episode of a series. That you have this larger threat taking captive one of your heroes, and then we have to discover what happens next. That's exactly what episodes set up. Not that this type cannot happen in movies, but there's a more general suspicion that the scene matches something shorter. I mean, I don't know how to describe it specifically, but I just have this weird pulse that's telling me it's clearly something like that, ending on this short cliffhanger of events before coming back out later where she gets the call to action to finish this episode off. But talking about this thing off screen for a sec is where I do like to compliment the animation for what it is also. Sure, some people might not be impressed as a normal production, but for the Vancouver studio working on something meant for a series, it seems pretty great. I do enjoy the colors of the island and the light surrounding them, even though it's not as impressive as the first time you see Moana and look at the vast ocean. The one big reason to why the live action film shouldn't exist because water just got more real and expressive in this form. But now going back is where we attend the feast where a sacred title was bestowed upon their ancestors as a wayfinder. the title of Tautai, just like we discussed with Vasa being the last. Her father wants to honor her with this to accept their reclaimed roles and lead them back to what's important for the future of their people. But in the midst of the ceremony comes a strike from the sky, sending her towards a vision of the past, and the name of the island revealed to be Motufetu. In this vision, Tautai Vasa tried to travel to Motufetu but couldn't find anything but a dark cloud that happens to be the embodiment of Nalo himself guarding something that they should have reached, and then sending her below towards the spirit animal of Tautai Vasa, who appears before Moana to tell her of this very important journey.
This is your future if you cannot find others. In isolation, this is how your story ends. You must brave the storm, reconnect our people, find Motufetu.
That if she can't find it, he vaguely says that she will end up being isolated, alone, and doomed everyone unless she goes farther than ever before. And she wakes up to tell her parents about this worried vision with the lightning strike, where Moni pulls up history of Motufetu, an island that connected all the people of the sea until it was lost under the curse of Nalo, that dividing the people of the ocean seems to make him stronger rather than them altogether, and if they can't find it, their story would end it right there. A big doomsday event that feels important, but also not as important in terms of saying things like the story ends here, suggesting that there was more story content along the way besides whether it be this movie or something else. And so, the fire in the sky appears to push Moana forward to Motufetu, which causes her family to panic like her sister, who just doesn't want to be separated from Moana once again, causing a difficult choice for her to see. Her mother, on the other hand, encourages her on to do what is right as Tautai, meaning that the hardest choices have to be made if you want to go beyond. Which is actually a nice segue into the Beyond song, as the new I Want song contrasting with How Far I'll Go, the strong point of the entire film. It's a good song, that I'll say, but it still is no How Far I'll Go, again being a weaker version of that just to set her off on this new journey. And it's more than what the DVD films could say, like Mulan, that just have her sing to others about how to work together rather than working on herself in reflection, but how it's still more a repetition of events we already know so that she can get out once again. It's a song of her questioning if it's right to go beyond, pushing farther than she's ever known that can cost her everything she's built in the previous movie, and by extent song, getting encouraged by the spirits of her past like Grandma Tala to get out there and to find out that she never stopped choosing who we're meant to be. Finally ending where she has the courage to continue on even if she doesn't know what's out there, knowing who she is because of the land and sea.
Last time you weren't old enough to understand all you could lose or learn. But here we are, together still, just a little different. I can't see where your story leads, but we never stop choosing who we are.
Where, like I just said, it's exactly what you expect this song that is just to set her off on this new journey. It's not providing anything we haven't already known about her other than having a new little sister to take care of compared to finding more about herself for the first time. The I Want desire, where this song is the more of I shall, to continue what we already established. There's also this fact in the film that Tala's role is reduced to a large degree in just these songs reprised by Rachel House. That her impact is limited as a spirit since she found out who she was, where to me it just feels a little awkward because of how small it was, having Maui probably take that greater presence later for her to continue. And this is where events begin to end the first episode with her gathering her crew finally to help, and you can tell it's the end because she's going in search of the goal and needs to gather people needed for the next sequence. So Moni and Loto are willing to go out based on their own skills or meeting Maui, while Kele actually does not want to be part of it, being the grumpy old farmer who hates singing.
Take even my best apprentice, you'd starve.
Exactly. We need a master.
Yes, you do need you.
Thanks, Kelly. You're the best.
Walked into that one.
Like, you get what they were aiming for based on their personality and traits, but how it feels unnecessary knowing the original Moana, getting that serious vibe once again of including them rather than say something like Atlantis that started out with the crew in the first. Like, if you remember the journey, they required their help and expertise where their personalities were a plus and not a minus to the film to be thrown away for the sake of the last act. They were there to actually help in a big portion and were not removed out of segments because they needed to focus back on who we know in Moana and Maui. You can get why she needs the big help to even attempt to make it with an enemy far more threatening than Taiai. As you will see, he plays more dirty, but you have to question if they really thought it was a good choice to have. Sure, sequels always have newer characters, but they do have a good purpose, either good or bad, and they won't have that, as I mentioned back in my YouTube short that got lots of views for some reason. But before they go, Moana leaves her sister with the gift of the ocean itself, the actual ocean coming to greet her as she did a long time ago, to remind her of each other, to remind us where the heart truly belongs as she sets out for the daring journey to continue for better or worse. Also, you can really tell that it's how the episode ends by the wave transition back to Maui. Like, that is just a clear indication that that was the end of the first episode, where, you assume the credits would have been playing here with the song sending them on their way, because it's literally right there in broad daylight, trying to appear smooth compared to how to say the first episode of Milo's Return just ended with them cutting back to Mr. Whitmore's mansion before they go out again. This transition of course leads us to Maui once again, trapped with his hook on the surface, hanging down to call up these fish-like creatures to rise up and activate them like sleeper agents to help him to turn heel like John Cena did. At least that's the only reference I can make to The Rock right now, to just try to be funny with them zooming out to reveal how useless they are in this weirdly filthy area. It's more of that series kind of baiting things that these episodes usually do, where he's trapped here by Matangi and he has to seek a way out. They just love to do this in this movie, of these back and forth scenes between Maui and Moana before they get reunited because of that basis, and it kinda splits our attention in a bad way, since Moana was solely based on her own perspective rather than going out here and there. I get what needs to be done to show he's out there, yet how we keep getting provided information that was never intended to be a movie. Which, I have to say, I apologize if I mention the word series or episodes too often, but again, it's hard to ignore the glaring issue that was supposed to be done in that way, regardless of what was planned to switch. It was just there, and they made it so early in the year before it was released, so I'm just going to continue to hammer that point, as this title should suggest. It's a TV sequel in the way that an episode is playing and another one's playing as a movie marathon, and that's what we're going to get. So back in the sea, switching to Moana once again, she has a hard time trying to get the crew to work together, as it is their first time out in the ocean, with hijinks galore and a frustrated Moana not being able to have her crew embrace the sea.
You can't embrace the liquid.
Also, I cannot swim!
And the only thing you can get from this is how it's just basically one big mess, both in terms of the story and here in the real world, with them even daring to make this a thing since their purpose was written in a certain manner. Which is where we're finally presented in what I call the worst song in this film, with a song called What Could Be Better Than This? Anything actually could be better than this, because it's just a song about them working together on the sea. A brief comedic moment to have our cast harmonize even if they don't want to, like Kelly, who at least did not join in when the film made me expect that he would, since they're all crazy and deranged people who sing a song. Because now this is a song that matches up with what you expect out of a direct-to-DVD, literally like that kind of song as Lesson Number 1 or the festival song that Quasi and Kloppen sing. Or it's just right here now to help the ragtag band of misfits to come together, and I really don't like it regardless of its original true intentions in that format, because it's something that distracts rather than presents for the purpose of having these characters involved in some way. It's just a song that will escape you after you finish watching it, since it's just drilling in the same fact of having this is a good thing compared to doing other things. It's just such a series-coded move to do, since you wouldn't expect her to do it in the original because she was by herself. The only thing that is comparable to that is actually You're Welcome as the next song after How Far I'll Go. Well, technically speaking in the main character sense, since we know that We Know the Way is the more appropriate comparison, and even that is a better story-wise to showcase Moana's history rather than, let's clap our feet and force everyone to groove to the rhythm of the sea. It is all meant to lead up to this moment that Kelly can't swim or attempt to with the water and the help of the ocean until the comet or the fire in the sky explodes like a firecracker, leading their path to nowhere anymore until current drags them to a different place, where our past finally catches us up once again with the Kakamora appearing in the familiar roles, attacking them as she would come to expect, but not without a twist onto them. And this is where the movie actually takes a goofier turn. The Kakamora bent on retrieving the heart for themselves in the first movie or actually be revealed in search of Motufetu also, leaving on these boats because they lost their home and they want to look for a way back, connecting them to everyone else. And it's just super silly because they turn an obstacle of villains and ne'er-do-wells into misunderstood characters searching for the same thing that they had now. This is where I almost forgot that they added a new character consisting of this one Kakamora who is enlisted to help their journey, that we now have more sidekicks to join in for some reason, just to end the next episode on off. This is just like a filler part that's meant to include other aspects of the world, where they have this green blob fish that tastes like coconut rubbing their slime as a remedy to get their darts out of their butt, and they use his toxin, which happens to be his snout, to make things even more gross, to make the giant clam fall asleep before it swallowed them all whole, which happens to be the entrance to Matangi's lair, conveniently enough. Like, they all try their best to succeed, but they still manage to fall down, where the characters get separated from each other, where the Kakamora and the rest of the crew are down here, and Moana is on the other side waiting for Matangi as events of the next episode, basically separating our crew so that they could meet with Maui.
Can I get a chee-hoo?
Who had been basically this whole entire time been stuck down here until our crew came in and actually helped them escape. To of course have some other comedic moments where he finally meets with his biggest fan, but how Maui also expresses fear for Moana's life down here, being face to face with the gods themselves or creatures unknown, until a short reunion with Hei to explore where she finally is, where I just don't find them to be of use anymore since they're just over here. Sure, they're going to be involved later on the boat to Nalo, but this is like halfway into the film and feels more like they just dragged them out here to just be with Maui. Again, this is in comparison to the Atlantis films, where the crew had their intended purposes from beginning to end. Mo being the digger with the expertise in earth materials, Vinny delegating with explosives, Dr. Sweet being the good healer, Audrey the mechanic, and whatever Cookie does. That most of them in both films do serve a purpose to their stories. They aren't huge main characters, but they are in still some way helping out Milo reach Atlantis with their own tools of the trade, even going on to reveal their true intentions before joining them, and actually helping out with their own uses in Milo's return also. Some characters involved in one subplot if needed, or not based on that fact, compared to this film with Kele, Loto, and Moni just here staring at Maui or talking to him or messing up Moana's boat for the most part. The only useful crew member would actually now be the damn coconut who can at least fight compared to everyone else in this realm. It's just how this story is just not giving them the real time they needed to actually properly know them. As a sequel to Moana, we know we spent the most time with one girl and one demigod, but how they expect us to follow these adventures of more characters alongside them in this hour and 40-minute film, and it doesn't really work. But beyond that, on Moana's side, she finally gets to meet face to face with Matangi, who reveals her true self to the audience while explaining what she needs to find.
I need
Get out of here, break Nalo's curse, find Motufetsu. Here to help.
That this could be a little suspicious to what we know about her since she did trap Maui for the time being up to this point, but now actually saying that she wants to help Moana despite being supposedly the secondary antagonist that helped Nalo up until this part of the film. Now doing this weird 180 where she sings this song, which fun fact about this is the actress that plays Matangi has also done the Maori dubs of other Disney songs in other Disney films, also providing the same voice if you want to hear that dub 2 of this film, just like Ali'i did in the Hawaiian language version of Moana and Moana 2, that you should definitely watch. Saying that as a Hawaiian who really wants to preserve his language. But this whole event is just seeming so weird for the obvious reason that she actually, and I mean actually, helps Moana. The song is an obvious parallel to Shiny by Tamatoa, where he gloats about himself and spanks Maui around from getting his hook, but now in this cave system having the character tell the hero what you need to do in order to get where she wants to go. Matangi to me as a character just doesn't make sense anymore, because I was excited as the supposed antagonist messing with our heroes, but ends up being helpful in a new way, getting lost in this weird funky groove, where she trapped Maui to stop him from reaching Nalo, but also apparently wants to help her because she doesn't want to be stuck under Nalo anymore, where it just doesn't make any logical sense. Like, who really planned this plot? It just seems even ridiculous to involve that or set up events in that way. But how this entire event is somehow remedied because she reveals to Maui that Moana as a wayfinder was necessary to open the portal back up and send both Maui and Moana down under, if that makes any sense to you, since she still serves under a god. Where I still have to ask again, who made this plot?
This was your plan to keep me in a snot cave because you want us to go together?
Well, I certainly did not keep you for the conversation.
Huh? Wait.
This is just throwing me off, because it's something that needs more time in the oven to actually think about, which this one didn't do at all. We have the first half of the film going with Matangi trapping Maui, and then going with the second half to reveal that she was just helping them out and wanted them back together, getting the gang back together. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this entire concept. If this entire sequence was necessary when you're just doing the same thing as Lalotai, except that if Taumatoa was willing to help both Maui and Moana, something she admits is a dangerous thing because if Nalo ever found out that she helped Moana, they would be both lightning struck. And again, it's just something I have to say is so disappointing because she should have become a villain with the way she acted towards Maui in the first. Because in fact, one of the promos released by Disney, Auli'i Cravalho actually talks about how Matangi was this cool villain that they had in the film, but by what we've seen and actually actively helping Moana, she is not.
Matangi is gorgeous, first and foremost, the most beautiful Disney villain, but she's also incredibly dangerous.
It's the same damn problem with Namari, except it's not as hurtful as that damn character. Just more of the problem of an attempted villain that's not actually a villain at all. At least Nalo is still a villain by our standards in Moana, and that's good. But back to Maui's side of things, he tells Moana that despite actually being good seeing them again, that they're all going to die. Because Nalo made a storm so powerful that no human could actually pass unless they faced death, hence why he wanted to go alone to stop him rather than endanger her and everyone else's lives like the chicken. Although, in this point of the story, it's already too late to do anything about that since we already were here sent to go this far, and she needs to fulfill her destiny as Taiai like Vasa said earlier. Otherwise, why would we even be here in the first place? Although, I still would add that I like their dynamic still despite the more zany comedical nature of Moana in this film compared to the original.
Maui and Moana, together again. You're so amazing.
That's always something that remained in their characters, and is always a great part compared to where they began. We then find out that Nalo's monsters tried to chase them down, stopping their path, and proving how useless it was to add these other characters who try their best to survive until they're all stranded. This part of the journey is where Moana struggles again because of how dangerous this realm really is. The crew is dejected since Moni almost drowned and discovers that this island is where Taiai Vasa's canoe also ended up, meaning they died here on their quest against Nalo, where Moana's fate might end up to be the same. Or not, because Maui's actually here for her. That despite his little warning that she shouldn't have come, now comes the time of pep talk since she's feeling down again about the events.
You want to get through it? You just gotta chi-hu it.
You are so bad at this.
It's the reversal of what she did when she was comforting Maui back in the original, and also the part where Tala actually comforts her again to be strong. But like everything else, it's more of a lesser version of those events, where Maui tells her that he's got his strength back because of his adventure with Moana, beginning the song Can I Get a Chi-hu? And I would literally describe this as a more workout song, trying to pump her up again as much as possible that she's got the skills to go higher and further than ever before. And it's just a song that's literally combining what Dwayne's actually good at when it comes to singing. The fun nature of You're Welcome, but also feeling like that part he sung in the Face Off song when he said, it's about drive, it's about power. Like, that's what it literally feels like since they wanted him to do that, since it fits in a wave with his own acting. But how it's a point of kind of being disappointing because its nature isn't meant for a film talking about the emotional structure in this part, and then he's not really singing as much as You're Welcome, where Lin had this perfect song for him to really sing in this part to speak about his own character. This one is great too, but it's just combining those elements and hoping it works. However, I will say, I love this part of the movie where she gets to point out the thing that I've said time and time again, speaking in terms of the definition of a princess.
Go get him, princess.
Still not a princess.
Well, a lot of people think you are.
You think you could just get away with this, Mini Maui, but I know your tricks, your fourth wall breaking Disney merchandise show. I am still vindicated that she's not a princess, and I will die by that damn sword. So back together again, they regroup and finally encourage themselves to use their skills to finally face Nalo, that they want to join in willingly and do something great as part of the great stories of their own people.
I spent my whole life learning our people's stories. Because of you, I get to live one.
This is where we reach to what appears to be the final act of the movie or episode with the battle to face Nalo, which is a great sequence but was not simply supported by the rest of the film to properly accept. Like, it's fantastic in my opinion with Maui trying to chop up the storms and everyone else on the boat pulling together to stop Nalo, but I feel like we don't have enough real information to digest this part as what it could have been. The overall story is there. Contrasted with the actual episodes of Milo's return, we get that, but also we get a sense of dissatisfaction where there was something more to be said. The plan of Moana to distract Nalo while Maui gets to the island lifted once more. The great use of Loto finally using her skills and Moni's drawing to make them sail faster against Nalo. Well, Gele is just there too, I guess, until he saves Maui later on. But Nalo, on the other hand, is also just too strong to stop, because he's in fact a god going against mortals and just a demigod. That power combined cannot defeat one. Remembering Tekka was not destroyed either, but just turned back into Te Fiti, and we can't assume that they would manage to destroy Nalo at all. But with his overpowered strength, he does one thing that's almost quite shocking, resulting in Maui's tattoos to disappear and to be swallowed by the sea. Almost like he was going to die in the scene, being actually stripped of his own powers. And it's a very shocking scene because Moana cries out to Maui knowing that they almost were defeated in that moment. Like, it's very, very heartbreaking, but it's not supported by the rest of the film like I just said. But the perseverance as a wayfinder for Moana allows her to reach the top of the island by touching it, finally actually breaking the curse, but also at the cost of her own life as Nalo killed her with a lightning strike, leading to Maui, who finally recovered after Kele's efforts to go back down and retrieve her, where because of his heart of his friend, he finally starts chanting below in the water bubble, calling upon her ancestors like Tala and Tautaivasa to help revive her once again, which grants her a magical tattoo to give life back to her. Which you're actually not going to believe this, but this actually does mean that Moana literally turns into the demigoddess of the sea right here. Like, after all these events, she finally becomes powerful just like Maui in a way where I didn't know that was the route was going to be taken, because they didn't explicitly explain this until I read on both wikis that this was the case. Like, seriously? She's actually a demigod now? This is the biggest event of the film that's going to be a lot to take in, because it could mean so many things that we never knew up to this point. Because if that's the case, if she's a demigoddess, the filmmakers actually did not do a good job at showing this, where the entire sequence is where we once again just leave our friends to be stuck on the surface of the canoe. Sure, it's for the emotional moment between Maui and Moana, but they still exist and they get left here in these scenes constantly as those useless sidekicks once again, because the focus is on our main characters we've traveled in the first place. At least the most minor of the group in Atlantis did have something to do, and regardless of their stories and in the big moments, they literally help them in so many ways, and this is where they hardly do anything for the most part, other than the two demigods now appearing to him apparently. It doesn't change my view for the worst on this film, but it sure does affirm that this structure should have been given a series, even if they did still make $1 billion, because it just doesn't fit a movie format. I mean, okay, they did allude to it with the tattoos that she is one now, and you can see in that scene with Maui still gloating about his own, but it's not really explicitly explained in the proper way, and still weird to take in that she does have these powers now, where I really get both perspectives of wanting this as a series and then eventually working into a movie, but not really coming to this moment where she does become a demigod. That's a lot of pretty big implications moving forward in the entire Moana franchise.
Does this mean...
Yes, my tattoos are still cooler than yours.
But finally back in the film, with the island raised, the people of the ocean reconnect, reaching Motofetu, and finally reuniting our species once more to do greater things. Like, you get a sense that this is what they were aiming for with all the Pacific together, where all the ocean is connected once again. This is where we go back to Motunui, where Maui tells them the good news, with Moana bees dressed like her in the original dress that are actually played by the Rock's real-life daughters. And he finally tells Simea right here that her sister finally gave her a present with the arrival of herself back, not only reuniting with her family, but bringing back so many people alongside, celebrating the beginning of something new, with more faces to join our crew. That in the end, we finally return to know the way back in the ocean, with our people connecting across island to island and sea to shining sea, with the reprise of the original song that is actually performed by Auli'i and the rest of the cast instead of Lin. And the movie finally ends similar to the original again, with a close-up on her face with her new demigod-like powers as they are in search of new, more adventures on their horizon, with this crew who did jack for the most part. Like, that ending with them right there is just a signal that there was more to come out of this, potentially like a season 2 or whatnot. Instead, that could be a movie like Moana 3 that end things appearing to be a lot more if this is successful. And as we finally see in the end credits, like any good Marvel movie, Nalo's real form appears to Matangi, talking about how she shouldn't have been possible to go to the island to break the curse without someone's help, probably hers in this case, which he handcuffs into helping him with his revenge. Also revealing the laugh of the one and only Tamatoa, who is indeed back come up from his shell position. And like everything we discussed in the last few seconds of this film, this is one that does set up more events that would have been in a second season of Moana, going on more adventures to deal with Nalo and now Tamatoa again, who is just as shiny as ever. And although I like Jermaine Clement being back and all, I just feel like this all but confirmed my own conviction that this should have been released as a series on Disney Plus rather than what it did do in theaters. That it's a movie that really wasn't meant for that and feels like the first ever direct-to-DVD sequel released on the big screen, with better effects but the same mediocre story we are all too familiar with. So now finally reaching the ending, because I really don't want to spend more time anymore talking about what appears to be a TV movie and treating it as such, is where we realize that Moana 2 could have been a great sequel, but chose not to because it just wasn't meant to be one in the first place. Instead, repeating ourselves back to the days of yore that they repackaged cancelled TV shows to sell to the public but masqueraded as a theatrical one to fill any issue they had, releasing a movie back for good or bad reasons because of the past 2 years with films like Wish and Strange World. But what the success of this movie means is the power of what Moana holds on streaming service. Its profitable gross represents the impact that Moana has on society and still holds regardless, that didn't do great harm but still provided the people with a decent good story if they like these characters, getting good performances out of them, but not the new ones in service of an actual story that never even existed. What it means for the future is still very confusing in the next film like Zootopia 2, promising something more but feared on what has been developed if they're able to turn on a switch like that for a produced series. So whatever you think about this film, you just have to see those facts as is, and remember what should be to be much better to come, even if it takes time to do so, preventing stuff like this to happen if there was a good case. Moana 2 instead will just live on memory for the good times to spend with others, but simply not for the bigger screen it started out on. And I'm all done, and I'm just gonna watch Lilo and Stitch the series again.